A 16-year-old girl rode her bicycle home and vanished. Her body was discovered the following day in a field close to the road. She had been murdered, and the assailant had fled. Even though the police had the perpetrator's DNA sample, it took them 13 years to track him down. In this video, we'll explain Marianne Vestra's fate and the reasons that this murder is one of the most infamous in Dutch history.
Welcome to A to Z Crime Stories. Before we start, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more.
On August 10, 1982, Marianne Vestra was born in the Netherlands. She resided in the tiny town of West Rene with her parents. The young woman was the youngest of 6 children and lived in a village in the north of the country, far from major cities. She had 3 sisters and 2 brothers. Marianne was left to live with her parents and one older brother after the majority of the older kids eventually moved away for other towns and countries. The young lady enjoyed music, went to the neighborhood school, and had lots of friends. Small towns and settlements scattered throughout the area where she lived were only a few kilometers apart from one another. Marianne frequently traveled to other cities as a result of this. Places in the area where she can go shopping or spend time with friends. She also had a part-time job at the neighborhood grocery store. On April 30, 1999, the nation observed Queen's Day, a significant holiday. After finishing her shift at the store, Marianne left to spend the evening with her friends at a nearby town called Colum. A short while later, Marianne's boyfriend and his friends joined their group, and they all made the decision to travel to the nearby town of Boynton Post, which was 6 kilometers away. Marianne didn't own a bicycle, so she borrowed one from her friends and went for a ride with them as the group rode their bicycles there. After some time, they made the decision to return home. The young woman set out for the town, which was about 11 kilometers away, but she never arrived. Marianne's parents learned that she had spent the night with a friend who lived nearby. The young woman had promised to be home by evening, and if she had chosen to spend the night with her friends, she would have kept that promise even though it was improbable. Definitely made an early morning call to home. To his surprise, Marianne's father surprised him by calling her best friend Affie's home. He learned that his daughter had bid her friend farewell that evening and left for home. Everyone realized that Marianne might have suffered a bad outcome at this point. They drove along Marianne's homecoming route after her friend called her boyfriend and invited her sister along. The young woman's father made the decision to call the police right away in the meantime. He informed them of his. In the meantime, Affie and her sister and boyfriend were driving near the settlement of Finkleister with vast fields on either side of the road when they noticed something shiny in the grass and stopped. As they approached the field, they saw a bicycle lying in the grass. Daughter had not returned home and none of her friends knew where she was. Soon 2 officers arrived to take a missing persons report, after which they returned to the station and prepared to begin their search. Marianne was lying there, she had a cut on her neck and was naked. They were all taken aback. Marianne's paws needed to be examined, but Affie was unable to bring herself to approach the body. Although it was clear that the young woman had passed away, her best friend was in such shock that he refused to accept it. She had a difficult time removing her phone before dialing 911. At the same time that several officers arrived on the scene, 2 of them went to Marianne's home. They didn't have official confirmation at the time. The officers picked up her father and took him to the scene after learning the victim's identity. The father, to his grief, recognized Marianne right away while the forensic investigators were already on the scene. The detectives examined the scene and noticed a crucial detail: there were 2 bicycle tracks leading from the road to the location where the young woman's body was lying and only one track going the other way, indicating that the murderer was also riding a bicycle. The area was combed by the police. They searched the area around the crime scene for hints and even used aerial photography, but all they discovered was a lighter. The police took Marianne's friend to the lab after learning that she didn't smoke and didn't have a lighter. Medical examiners discovered evidence of semen, which they used to create a sample of the killer's DNA, and concluded that the young woman had been abused. The lighter was found to contain the same DNA, which was uploaded to the police database, but no matches were found. As a result, the perpetrator had never been in trouble before. The Marianne boyfriend named Spencer was chosen by the police as a suspect almost immediately after the body was discovered. Although there was no evidence against him, the chief of the local police force believed that the boy was the most likely murderer in this case. The young man voluntarily gave a sample of his DNA, but it did not match the DNA that was discovered on the victim's body. In the interim, the incident had received extensive coverage in the area's print and television media. The public demanded that the police find the murderer as soon as possible because murders were practically unheard of. The issue was that the detectives were already at a standstill after just 1 week. They had the killer's DNA sample but no suspects. Additionally, there were a lot of calls from locals to the police. There was no evidence to support any of their theories, but some of them believed a familiar person might have been responsible for the murder. When asked where Marianne's body was, the vast majority of people pointed to a single location close to the field. A migration center for those who had requested asylum was discovered. The majority of those present were from Iran and Syria. This theory gained ground in the nearby towns with each passing day, and at one point an impressive number of people were absolutely certain that a refugee had carried out the murder. The police had to look into this possibility as a result. Marianne's funeral was held on May 5th. At that precise moment, nearly 1,500 people, many of them residents of nearby communities, came to support her family. The woman's parents planned a memorial 2 days later. They spoke to the crowd at the conclusion of the procession. A total of about 20,000 people attended the event, mostly as a result of the case receiving widespread national attention. Each day, more and more people called the police, and at one point, the detectives received a really good tip. Many people claimed to have seen Marianne in a cafe one evening as a certain Oriental-looking guy tried to get to know her. The guy made a gesture toward the young woman after she declined, placing his thumb along her throat because she was. The young man was killed in this way, and the police started looking for him right away. He was a 15-year-old refugee from the same migration center, it turned out. Although he acknowledged making the gesture, he refuted any involvement in the killing. DNA from the boy was provided, but it did not match that of the victim's body. Locals blamed the migrants from the center for the refugees in spite of this. Even more security guards had to be hired by the organization just in case. People arrived 12 days after the murder, out to protest at the immigration center. They simply shouted commands to hand over the murderer at first, but by evening, things had significantly worsened. The building was targeted by several people who threw Molotov cocktails, prompting the police to step in. Since then, security at the center has been significantly increased, and similar demonstrations have not occurred again. A few days later, the police reported the arrest of Pitt, a 32-year-old resident of Marianne's town. He was a local drunkard and was despised by the majority of the locals. A witness called the police and reported seeing Pitt wearing bloody clothing, which led to the arrest. The man was arrested the night of the murder, and a sample of his DNA was sent to a lab. The news of the new suspect quickly spread throughout the country, but the DNA test didn't match the sample, and the witness later admitted to fabricating the entire case as retaliation against Pitt for a personal vendetta. Police began studying the log in order to look into any potential connections to the immigration center, a book that tracks every refugee departure from the asylum area. They were allowed to leave the center, but before doing so, they had to look in the log and note their destination. As it turned out, 2 refugees who had left the center the night of the murder had not given any indication of their destination. They were Mohammed, 19, and Ali, 26 years old. Police started looking into their potential involvement, but no information was made public for a while. The fact that investigators were restraining Marianne's family infuriated Marianne's father. Hannah discovered the murderer. He got in touch with a renowned crime reporter, who agreed to take the case and work to uncover more details. First, the 2 refugees who left the center on the night of the murder were in the same cafe as Marianne. They also left almost immediately after the young woman and her friends left, and second, ever since that very night, the whereabouts of these refugees have been unknown. The victim's father spoke out about these facts on a popular television program on July 1st. The men were unidentified, they had left the center and were not traceable by the police. They had pictures of both men at the same time, but for some reason the government withheld them from the public. After all of these details were broadcast on television, the police declared that they and Interpol were currently looking for these suspects. The predominant theory is that they might have left the nation. All of this has once more strained relations between locals and refugees. They came together once more in early October. On October 9th, Turkish police announced the capture of Ali, a 26-year-old suspect. He was brought to the Netherlands, where a DNA sample was taken and the necessary test was run. It turned out that he had been living in Istanbul the entire time. The man was exonerated because it did not match the sample that was discovered on the victim's body. The investigation is resumed, and even though her boyfriend's DNA does not match the original samples, the police's American family has started to suspect him once more. Spencer acted in a suspicious manner. Marianne would never ride her bike home at night because she was afraid of the dark and the distance wasn't that far, according to the young woman's friends and family. Even Marianne's parents agreed that Spencer ought to have sent Marianne home via camp. He decided to let her ride her bicycle alone instead. More questions were asked of the young man, and then an odd thing started to happen. He repeatedly modified his account of that evening in his testimony. Spencer initially claimed that he had met Marianne at a cafe, followed by a drive to the Butem Post for a second look. He claimed that the young lady had already arrived with friends when he arrived at the cafe, so Spencer rode his bicycle to meet her. He continued by saying that he had seen two guys walking a bicycle on the way there. Spencer initially claimed during one interrogation that he did not recognize them because it was very dark outside before revealing that they were two of his friends. The police had no evidence against Spencer, and his DNA did not match the murderers, making the whole situation seem strange. The case remained unresolved for several more months. On December 20th, the police made the decision to enlist the public's assistance. They requested DNA samples from all the local men, but there was trouble in store for them. The authorities set a cap for the police because it turned out that the law prohibited the mass collection of DNA from citizens even with their consent. Only 150 samples could be taken, and there were none that matched. After that, the case was essentially put on hold for several years. Marianne's parents attempted to have the law changed to permit extensive DNA screening, but they were denied. Despite the fact that similar actions had already resulted in the perpetrator's capture on numerous occasions in other nations, the justification was to protect people's privacy. The detectives released a rough description of the killer in July 2001. They thought the murderer was a local man between the ages of 20 and 40. Within a 5-kilometer radius of the Marianne murder scene, the police once more asked for permission to conduct an extensive collection of DNA samples, but they were once more turned down. After that, the case was finally put on hold. The victims' parents continued to appear on television programs and give interviews, but with each passing year the case received less and less media attention and no fresh information to shed light on the horrifying mystery. The police put together a team in 2010 that produced a thorough 3D model of the crime scene and all. Using the most recent computer technology and the available evidence, Marianne's parents once more discussed the importance of DNA testing. 11 years after their daughter was killed, authorities decided to finally think about changing the law at this time. The required amendments were approved on September 6, 2012, after a process that lasted almost 2 years. Please ask all men who were between the ages of 20 and 40 in 1999 to bring their DNA samples to the press conference. The archive. They estimated that they were talking about 8,000 men, but not all of them agreed to provide their DNA. The area was also limited to 5 kilometers. Just over 6,500 samples were successfully collected by the police, and experts started analyzing them. Since the lab's resources were constrained and they could only check 400 samples per week, the study had to last up to 4 months. The experts compared the samples to the killer's DNA profile, but they weren't just looking for a perfect match because the murderer was improbable to have used the samples. Would have provided the police with his DNA. The laboratory was also attempting to identify the similarities that would allow them to establish kinship and connect the murderer to a father, brother, or other relative. A month after the test started, on November 19, experts received the long-awaited match. It was unexpected that they didn't just discover a known connection, instead, they also obtained the murderer's DNA, proving that he voluntarily gave it to the authorities. Detectives quickly reported the arrest of 45-year-old neighborhood resident Jasper Syringa. His home was just a few kilometers from the scene of Marianne's murder. He is a farmer and a father of two. The defendant initially remained silent, but after speaking with his attorney, he decided to confess. The details of this terrible crime were only made public on March 28, 2013, when the trial got underway. According to Jasper, he decided to ride his bicycle before going to bed after finishing up his farm's evening chores. He acknowledged that most of the time he was just using his bicycle as a front. In reality, he was riding to take advantage of the intimate services of local women in a nearby village. While his wife was unaware of this, he claimed in court that he had only planned a ride to get away from his wife and the difficulties on the farm and had not intended to go there that evening. He once saw Marianne alone on a deserted, dark road, and he suddenly realized he could do whatever he wanted with her. Jasper pulled up next to her in his car, brandished a penknife, and yelled threats at her. Then he took her to a field and beat her and murdered her during the trial. The man insisted that he killed the young woman accidentally and out of panic. He became aware of what he had done and the effects it would have on his entire family. At the time, his children, who were ages 5 and 8, were about to learn what their father had done. Jasper chose to murder Marianne for this reason and then flee, but ever since he stayed in the neighborhood, heard people discussing the murder, saw Marianne's family, his conscience has been troubled. When a widespread DNA screening program was announced in 2012, Jasper realized he would be discovered because he had so many relatives in the neighborhood and one of them would have turned in his DNA. Experts would find a partial match and start looking into all his relatives, which would inevitably lead to his capture. Since then, he has repeatedly considered turning himself into the police but has never made up his mind. Nevertheless, he couldn't bring himself to confess at the police station. The judge handed down his sentence of 18 years in prison, out of a maximum of 20 years under Dutch law, on April 19, following a brief trial that lasted only a few weeks. Marianne's family finally got to see the offender punished, but because of his good behavior, the legal system gave them a nasty shock. Jasper will have served less than 10 years in prison when he is released as early as 2023. Share your opinion on this story in the comments and don't forget to like it. Thanks for watching.
In this video, we'll discuss crimes perpetrated between 1996 and 2014. Despite the wide time span, all of these crimes had one thing in common. They were all committed along Virginia's Route 29, a major thoroughfare. The police looking into these crimes made several attempts, some of which were successful, to connect the incidents in some way. Some of the criminals referenced in this video may have already come up in separate investigations, though. Here, we'll try to look at the events from the standpoint of several offenses. In 1996, more than 20 women went to the police and said they had all been chased by a man in a pickup truck on Virginia's Route 29. He would communicate an issue with their automobiles and flash his headlights. A white male between the ages of 35 and 45 with reddish-brown hair who was driving a pickup vehicle was characterized as this individual. He earned the moniker Route 29 Stalker, 25-year-old Alicia Reynolds. Alicia Reynolds said her husband Mark farewell on March 2, 1996, at 7:30 in the morning in Baltimore, Maryland, and left for Charlottesville, Virginia. She had a meeting with her mother scheduled for 10:30 a.m., but she had nearly 150 miles to travel. She held off till 11:30 a.m. Alicia's mother contacted her husband Mark, but did not hear from her daughter. Mark informed her that Alicia had departed 4 hours prior, and that by that time, even without rushing, she should have arrived. After making the decision to call the police, Alicia's car was eventually discovered at 6 p.m. on the side of Route 29. Despite being close to Culpeper, Alicia was nowhere to be found. When the car was inspected, there were no indications of a crime, and afterwards, specialists said the car was mechanically fine. What caused the young woman to leave her automobile unattended is unknown. An inquiry was launched. Soon, witnesses who had observed Alicia conversing with a man in a blue pickup truck on the side of the road were located. The alleged first victim of the stalker on Route 29 is Alicia Reynolds. All the women who had been pursued by the man in the pickup truck before she vanished and who hadn't previously recognized they were in danger came forward to the police and related their interactions with the unidentified pursuer after she vanished. It was discovered that 3 other ladies had previously dated in addition to Alicia. 2 of them were delivered to their destinations in the pickup truck, but the third woman, Carmelita Shomo, was not. Sadly, no picture of her could be located. A week before Alicia vanished, Carmelita stopped at his request. She saw someone flashing their headlights at her in the rearview mirror as she was traveling home from work on Route 29 that wet night. She stopped, and the pickup truck's driver followed suit. She was said there were sparks as the man approached her after getting out of his car. He then offered to give her a ride home, and she consented, telling him that it was coming from underneath her car while she was driving, and that it might be unsafe to keep using it. The pickup truck stopped on the side of the road after a brief trip, and the woman was then attacked. Despite having a fractured ankle, she was able to get out of the pickup truck and draw the attention of oncoming traffic, which startled the driver and caused him to speed away. However, Carmelita, an immigrant with poor English language, reported the event to the police. At that moment, no steps were done to identify the pickup truck driver due to the police officer's dismissive attitude and lack of respect for her word. Despite the efforts of law enforcement, the police were unaware that their incompetence would eventually result in a tragedy for the Reynolds family. 2 months after going missing, Alicia was not located. Her body was located 15 miles from where her car was found, in a forested location. Laura Winans is 26 years old, and Julianne Williams is 24. May 1996, the same month that Alicia Reynolds' remains were found again, saw the father of Julianne Williams call the police on May 31st to report his daughter missing. She hadn't arrived at the appointed time since she and Laura Winans were on vacation in Shenandoah National Park. They were last seen extending their stay at the campground on May 24th at around 5:30 p.m. Following the police report, park rangers found the 2 women's bodies the following day. They were both killed by incisions to their necks and the binding of their wrists. Authorities gave May 28th plus or minus 30 hours as the date of death. It was discovered that there had been no sexual activity before the victims' deaths, and their possessions were still in their tent. We shall return to this incident later. This motiveless crime baffled detectives, and the authorities were unable to crack the case right away. Sophia Silva, 16, is a teenager. On September 9, 1996, 3 months later, 16-year-old Sophia Silva vanished from her yard in Spotsylvania County, without leaving any evidence of a struggle. Numerous searches. Sadly, it didn't produce any results.
Her remains was discovered in a King George County creek a month later. The test found that Carolyn McDaniel was 20 years old, and that Sophia Silva had also experienced sexual assault before to her death. 20-year-old Anne Carolyn McDaniel left her home in Orange and vanished 12 days after Sophia Silva was kidnapped. Occasionally, hitchhiking was something Carolyn McDaniel enjoyed doing. She was last saw hitchhiking on the road on September 20th, 1996. Her burned bones were discovered 2 days later, located in Culpeper County, only 15 miles from the location of Alicia Reynolds' body. Katie Lisk was 12 years old, and Kristen Lisk was 15. Despite the police's best efforts, 7 months had gone since Anne Carolyn McDaniel's death was discovered, and none of these crimes had any solid suspects. In the meantime, Spotsylvania, where Sophia Silva was kidnapped on May 1, 1997, was shaken by a fresh incident. Kristen Liske, 15, and her sister Katie, 12, went missing. The girls would typically contact their father when they got home from school because he was at work at the time. On this particular day, though, the father didn't hear from his girls, so he began making calls home. He went home right away because there was no response. None of the nearby residents had seen the girls, and they were nowhere to be found. The girls had come back, as shown by the bag with their school books that had been placed on the grass. But something had transpired since I got there. In the wake of it, a police report was made, and some 1,500 people joined the hunt for the girls. Their bodies were found in the South River, 40 miles from their house, 5 days later. The test revealed that drowning was the cause of death. Strangely, the water discovered in their lungs was probably clear tap water, much like in Sofia Silva's case. In their last moments, the girl's sexual integrity had been compromised. The types of crimes and some supporting evidence shown that a single person was responsible for these crimes. A Canadian visitor was riding in Shenandoah National Park on July 9, 1997, when she heard the sound of an approaching automobile. She was expecting the car to drive past, but it didn't. She noticed that the car was approaching her in an odd manner. The pickup truck's driver tossed a soda can at her before getting out and ordering her to take off her clothes. The woman tossed a water bottle at him and used her hands to block his path as he approached her. He tried to drag her into the car, using the bicycle as a barrier, but when he realized he couldn't, he got back in the driver's seat and tried to run her over. Being discouraged by yet another failure, she managed to hide behind a downed tree. The woman saw it as hell when a ranger just so happened to be walking by. He immediately radioed a description of the vehicle, a blue Chevrolet truck, and the person who was arrested as they were leaving the park. The culprit was identified as a 28-year-old man. On April 10, 2002, Daryl David Rice received his sentence of 11 years and 3 months in jail after pleading guilty to the attack in March 1999. In relation to the instances of Laura Winans and Julian Williams, Rice was charged. To refresh your memory, the young women's deaths were reportedly expected to occur around May 28, give or take 30 hours. It was discovered that Rice entered the park at around 8 o'clock in the evening by reviewing surveillance camera footage from that time. Dated May 25th. He returned to the park the following day at 5 p.m. and was seen on camera visiting the park on June 1, 1996, the day the young women's bodies were discovered. Rice knew he would likely receive the death penalty, so he hired a strong defense team that eventually had the accusations against him withdrawn. A hair discovered on the sticky tape used to bind the young woman was later determined through new DNA testing technologies to not belong to Rice. He was cleared of those charges in April 2004 due to insufficient evidence. But Rice's legal struggles were far from ended. The blue pickup truck he was driving when he was stopped belonged to his father, who resided close to Highway 29 in Virginia and was accused of being the Route 29 stalker. His attorney expertly handled the problem once more. When Rice was named as the attacker during the 2005 trial, Carmeliere Shomo, the woman who had successfully resisted the attack and broken her ankle in the process, pointed to a completely different person when she was shown photographs of men for identification prior to the trial. Years ago, in the middle of the night, the defense was able to sow a seed of doubt in her mind, making her wonder if Rice was the criminal. The defense team successfully exploited this uncertainty, which led to the charges being dropped. Additionally, there was no evidence linking Rice's actions to the Alicia Reynolds case, which is regarded as an incident involving the Route 29 stalker. Cases of harassment on the highway were only seized following Reynolds' disappearance. Additionally, nothing suggested Rice's involvement in the incidents in question, Spotsylvania and Orange. Despite numerous circumstantial evidence that the Route 29 stalker was in fact him, it was impossible to prove. As a result, the identity of the driver of the pickup truck that scared women is still unknown. Even with the given prize, the police made a concerted effort to solve these crimes, but they were unable to come any closer to the offender. 15-year-old Carol Robinson was at her friend's house on June 24, 2002, in Columbia, South Carolina, while an acquaintance showered. When a man with some pamphlets in his hands approached, Kara was watering the flowers in front of the house. He requested that Kara give her parents the items. He held a gun to her neck as she walked up to him and told her to get in his car. When he brought Kara to his house, she was chained and repeatedly forced to have sex, while the kidnapper was fast asleep. Kara was able to free herself, make her way outside, and eventually find a police station. She had been held captive at the station for 18 hours. Everything she recollected helped the police find her abductor, but by that point, he had managed to escape. The perpetrator was identified as Richard Mark, 38, an honorable man who appeared to be just like everyone else. Mark is a former member of the military who is married and works. He had left the Navy in 1987 after being exposed to a 15-year-old girl and her 3-year-old sister, it was learned. For this offense, he was given a 3-year sentence with probation. He was captured by the police in Sarasota. Ivana made the decision to commit suicide after realizing he had no other option and was marked by a gunshot and a burst of light. It was determined that he was involved in the cases of Sophia Silva, Kristen, and Katie Lisk, after inspecting his home and comparing the available evidence. The threads on the corpses of the ladies were an exact match to the strands on his bathroom carpeting. It's unbelievable, but forensic specialists were able to locate Kristen Lisk's fingerprints in the car's trunk 5 years after the crime. DNA testing. By examining the facts, it was finally determined who killed Sophia Silva Kristen and Katie Lisk, and it was also shown that his early life had a big impact on who he would become. When Mark was 6 years old, his father Joseph was giving him a bath, and water went into his eyes, causing him to scream. Mark's father Joseph was an alcoholic, and his mother was openly having affairs with other men. Joseph was enraged by this, and the child at the time claimed that his father intended to drown him. Family members claimed that Joseph also drowned, leaving their dog's Mark right in front of him. The pattern of his subsequent crimes is thought to have been influenced by this event, drowning his prey. Additionally, he was looked into for possible connections to the incidents on Route 29 and the Alicia Reynolds case, but none were found. Reports of the Route 29 stalker ended once the witnesses were dead, and Rice was incarcerated serving his sentence. But soon after, girls started reporting it again. Started vanishing once more in Virginia in 2005. An unidentified 26-year-old woman from Fairfax, Virginia, was being carried into a wooded area after being attacked from behind on Rock Garden Drive, while she was returning home on foot from a nearby store. Dark and poorly populated, it was already. She fought back vehemently and shouted, but the attacker eventually overwhelmed her around 10 p.m. He coerced her into a sexual act before starting to choke her. Thankfully, a bystander who was nearby heard the woman's cries and ran to help. The attacker made it away, and the police were able to collect a sample of his DNA. They also produced a composite sketch, but they were unable to capture him using this information right away. On October 10, 2009, Cassandra Morton, at age 23, was in Lynchburg. Cassandra Morton, age 23, vanished. She was last spotted on Park Avenue, which is located in Lynchburg's downtown. The only information the police could find when her family reported her missing was that she got into a black car with someone. Her remains were discovered 6 weeks later. Her body had been strewn with rocks by a passerby who had just passed by the last spot she had been seen. 20-year-old Morgan Dana Harrington was last seen in Lynchburg 7 days after Cassandra Morton vanished. Morgan Dana Harrington, age 20, vanished in Charlottesville, a nearby city 70 miles distant. On that terrible day, October 17, 2009, she was a student at a technological university. She and her pals went to see Metallica perform. When his opening band was on stage, she informed her friends that she would use the bathroom and then come back. Her pals were concerned because she had been gone for a while. When they called her at 8:48 p.m., she replied that she was outside the arena but was prohibited from entering due to the no re-entry rule. She also indicated that she was going home, but nobody seemed to think about how she would get there for some reason. No one can figure out why she left the arena since she never came back. She said that she needed to use the restroom, yet there are facilities inside the arena. It's still unclear how she got outside, or either it is genuinely unknown, or it is kept quiet for image purposes. Her wallet and phone were discovered the following day in a parking area close to the arena. 2 months later, on January 26, 2010, witnesses were located who had seen a young lady who resembled Morgan Harrington voting at a nearby bridge. A farmer in Albemarle County, 10 miles from the arena where the performance was held, found her bones. Later, the daughter's parents admitted that she was coerced into having a sexual encounter in the final moments of her life. Samantha Ann Clark, 19, vanished in Orange on September 13, 2010, when she was 19 years old. When Samantha left the house at 1:30 a.m. on the day of the incident, her mother Barbara was working the night shift. Her younger brother, who was 12 years old, stayed at home with her. He called his mother to let her know Samantha had left. When Barbara got home the next morning, she found her daughter's pajamas lying on the bed, indicating the teenager had changed before leaving. Admonish Samantha about threats he'd heard from friends. At the time, Taylor was not connected to Samantha Clark's disappearance in any way that the police could discover. The investigation came to a halt since the phone calls were insufficient to support any charges. Age 19 for Saga Smith, 19, vanished in the same Charlottesville, 3 years after Morgan Harrington went missing there on November 20, 2012. She informed her roommate of her plans to that particular day as she was leaving her home. No one saw her again after that. The name of the guy she was meant to meet, Eric McFadden, was discovered by the police. He admitted during questioning that he was scheduled to meet with Sage, but that it never took place because he had other matters to take care of while the police were determining their next course of action. Alexis Murphy, 17, left her home in a truck close to Lynchburg, approximately a 30-minute drive away, while McFadden departed. She and her dad had made a deal that she had never broken the rule that she had to be home by midnight. The first time Alexis didn't arrive home by midnight was on August 3, 2013, and her grandmother instantly recognized a problem. The calls went to voicemail, so they were unable to speak with Alexis on the phone. Alexis was well-liked on social media and had many of friends. In an effort to locate Alexis, her parents contacted anyone who may have seen her on the day of her disappearance. This effort helped crack the case, attracted a lot of social media attention, and was featured in national news. People talked about the path Alex was scheduled to take via the notorious Route 29 from the shipment to Lynchburg, a movie theater in Charlottesville, Virginia, 40 miles from Alexis's house, and in the other direction from Lynchburg where she was headed, was where her white Nissan, which she usually traveled in, was discovered 3 days after she vanished. Although the area was cordoned off, forensic specialists could find no evidence of a crime in the car. One was made in the investigation. Surveillance footage from the Livingston Liberty gas station provided a breakthrough in the investigation. Detectives carefully reviewed the video, which was captured on Saturday, the day Alexis left her house for Lynchburg. A slim-built man who held the door open for Alexis as he entered the building caught their attention in particular. The cashier who worked that day admitted to the police that there had been a brief exchange between the man, and the cashier also clearly remembers a Daffy Duck tattoo on the man's neck and the fact that he was driving a camouflage SUV after Alexis had paid and left for her car. The man exited the petrol station first, and Alexis followed shortly after, according to further analysis of the video. However, given that she was traveling in the direction of Lynchburg, this might have been a coincidence. Another video clip of the same person was obtained by the police. It was taken by a camera at an adult business in Charlottesville 1 hour before he at the petrol station appeared. He bought a movie from the selection offered at those shops, but the key finding was that Randy Taylor was indeed the man who had made the purchase. On the night of her abduction, Samantha Clark had received a call from the same person. The whereabouts of Randy Taylor was promptly discovered by the police. Only 1.5 miles separated him from the gas station and his mobile home. A search warrant might be obtained thanks to video evidence showing Alexis Murphy and Randy Taylor interacting on the day of her disappearance. Anything that might be connected to Alexis's disappearance was taken by FBI officers. Inside the trailer, they discovered 3 items that were particularly noteworthy: black hair, a severed artificial nail, and an earring stud. In close proximity to Randy Taylor's porch, within 20 meters, they discovered a broken phone that was also taken in for inspection. Within 2 days, the outcomes showed that it was Alexis Murphy's phone. Analyses proved Randy Taylor's connection to the missing girl, the earring, nail, and hair that were discovered in his home belonged to Alexis. Alexis Murphy was still missing, 11 days after she vanished, despite the fact that Randy Taylor had been taken into custody. When Taylor arrived at the courthouse, he was accused of kidnapping. Taylor began to speak when he recognized that the police were looking for information that would implicate him in both the kidnapping and the death of the missing young woman. However, his statement was now what everyone knew. He said that day Alexis was in his trailer as expected, but she wasn't there by herself. She was there with a black man named Damian Bradley who had dreadlocks. The authorities found evidence that Alexis and Damian Bradley had indeed interacted online and met in person. They visited Taylor's trailer, according to Taylor, to sell plants they were growing, and they had a beer. Taylor utilized a physical struggle between Alexis and her friend at some time to explain why Alexis's DNA was found in the police investigated Damian Bradley's alibi and discovered that he was in another state at the time. It seemed as though Taylor was merely attempting to place the responsibility elsewhere. In the meantime, FBI officers went back to the trailer for another push, and it worked. They discovered Taylor's t-shirt, which was worn the day Alexis vanished, and was now wrinkled below the couch. Eyelashes and hair extensions that are frequently used as extensions were wrapped within. After inspection, it was discovered that the eyelashes and hair were. These pieces of evidence were sufficient to accuse Randy Taylor of both the kidnapping and the murder of Alexis Murphy on May 8, 2014. Randy Taylor was given 2 consecutive life sentences in July after being found guilty on all counts. Taylor said he would divulge the whereabouts of Alexis's body if his 2 life sentences were lowered to 20 years in prison in response to Alexis's family, eliminating any remaining concerns regarding his role in the young woman's abduction. Declared that they would not engage in negotiations and would never give Taylor the chance to escape and hurt someone else. Before Alexis Murphy's family had any prospect of being able to say goodbye to her, nearly 6 hard years had gone. Human remains were found on private land on December 3, 2020, and on February 5, 2021, it was determined that the bones belonged to Alexis Murphy. Although Taylor was said to have disclosed the location of the remains, no agreements were made with him, and his sentence is still in place. It's important to note that Samantha Clark's case, who aired in 2010 and was tied to Taylor, was reclassified on January 15, 2021, and is now being handled as a homicide investigation. On September 13, 2014, Hannah Graham, an 18-year-old student, vanished from Charlottesville. She was last seen in the early hours of the morning at a mall. Extensive searches involving more than 1,000 volunteers were carried out a week after Hannah vanished, but she was not discovered. She was seen on surveillance video and the police found it. Jesse Matthew, 32, was recognized as the individual seen with Hannah in the video recordings. His flat was searched, but he wasn't taken into custody. He was named as a suspect in Hannah Graham's kidnapping 4 days after that. When a warrant was issued for Matthew's arrest, he had already left. The following day, he was captured in Galveston, Texas. He was thought to be planning to flee the nation and traveled to Mexico. On September 29, 2014, it was revealed that information gathered during Morgan Harrington's case linked Jesse Matthew to her death. Remains were discovered in Albemarle County on October 18, 2014. And they were eventually recognized as Hannah Graham's. Notably, these remains were located within 5 miles from the location of Morgan Harrington's remains. Matthew was charged with Hannah Graham's kidnapping on February 10, 2015, and on September 15 of that same year, he was also charged in connection with the Morgan Harrington case. However, it was later discovered that Hannah Graham and Morgan Harrington were, after a month of study, a number of Jesse Matthew victims fled Liberty University in Lynchburg after one of the female students accused him of rape. He was able to avoid punishment nevertheless, since the complainant abandoned the allegations. After enrolling at Christopher Newport University in Newport News a few days later in January 2003, Matthew was once more the target of the same accusations. The victim again retracted the accusations after the university police looked into the issue. Matthew, from January 15 to October 15 of 2003, I attended Newport University. There were 2 missing ladies during this time. The fate of Without a Trace and their locations are still unknown. No evidence linking Matthew to their cases or the Cassandra Morton case was discovered, despite the police's investigation into any possible connections between their disappearances and Matthew. With this knowledge, there is only one question that can be asked. If the police had done their job properly, and both colleges where the complaints were made, at least 2 lives would have been saved if Matthew had persevered in the cases without worrying about damaging their image. In Charlottesville, Matthew started working as a cab driver in 2005. It's important to note that in the same year, a woman traveling home from work in Fairfax was attacked. In the Fairfax case, Jesse Matthew was charged with 3 counts of kidnapping, and the police were able to get a DNA sample from the culprit at the time, which has since been found to match Jesse Matthews' DNA. First off, he was found guilty on all 3 counts and given a life sentence for each one on October 2, 2015. In addition to the 3 life sentences he has previously been given as of this writing, in the instances of Alicia Reynolds and Morgan Harrington, he was sentenced to 4 further life terms for each of those crimes on March 2, 2016. The positions of Sage Smith, Carolyn McDaniel, Samantha Ann Clark, Laura Winans, and Julianne Williams are still available. It is challenging when you look at these faces. It is difficult to think what additional horrors they may have kept buried in their closets, and it is much more difficult to comprehend the suffering they have caused the victims' loved ones. Share your opinion on this story in the comments, and don't forget to like it. Thanks for watching. Yo.
The student got on her bike and rode off. The police launched a search after reading Without a Trace, but none of them could have predicted the shocking information that would be revealed to them in just a few days. Even seasoned FBI agents were horrified by the shocking details that came to light in the case, and none of them anticipated the outcome.
Welcome to A to Z Crime Stories. Before we start, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more.
On February 11, 1996, in the small American town of Delta, Ohio, Sierra Juggin was born. The girl had 2 sisters and 2 brothers, and she grew up in a big, loving family. Sierra was an avid sports fan she loved to travel and was on the school volleyball team. The girl had always wanted to travel to Italy, and she worked very hard to make that dream come true before she was able to go while she was still in school. After graduating from high school, she began dating Josh. They attended various universities. Sierra made the decision to major in human resources with the intention of landing a job with her uncle, who ran a metal fabrication business. Despite the distance between her home and Toledo University, which is 50 kilometers away, she enrolled there, made plans for their future, and intended to continue dating. Even selecting engagement rings for their upcoming wedding took some time for the couple. The young woman spent her summer vacation in her hometown after 2 years of university. She still had some schoolwork to complete at that time, but she chose to do it from home in order to spend more time with her loved ones and her boyfriend. Sierra was also participating in an internship program at her uncle's business. The young woman, who was in her 20s, was meticulously preparing to soon after graduating, work there. Sierra made the decision to drive to her boyfriend's house on July 19, 2016. A few days prior, she had acquired a new bike, which she was eager to ride. At around 5 o'clock, the young lady left the house and left for Josh's house around 9 o'clock. When her mother got home, she discovered her daughter was gone. She found this to be a little odd. Since it was summer and getting dark outside just now, she had assumed Sierra would have returned home by this point. The young lady was also already in her 20s, so her mother wasn't concerned. She had assumed that her daughter would spend the night at her boyfriend's house, but when Josh called her at 10:30 p.m., everything changed. Sarah's boyfriend was unable to reach her, so he inquired as to whether she was at home. The young man claims that they split up at around 7 o'clock and that she hasn't gotten in touch since. The young woman's mother started to worry a lot because it had been more than 3 hours since then. Josh joined them in making calls to the young woman's friends and family in the hopes that she had dropped by one of them. Although Sierra was 20 years old, the police immediately started their search after learning that Josh was the last person to see her. When they spoke to him, the man said that the young woman arrived at his house shortly after 5 p.m. after traveling for about an hour and a half. The mother then called all the nearby hospitals, but no one there either. Finally, the woman decided to go to the police, and around midnight she filed a missing persons report. Josh rode his motorcycle while Sierra rode her bicycle. The couple's vehicle traveled through numerous cornfields along rural roads. Josh even captured a photo of Sierra riding her bike, which the teenager shared on social media. After some time spent riding around, they made the decision to part ways. A mile or so from her house, Sierra and Josh split up. She rode her bike home while the guy returned on his motorcycle. Other officers were driving around in search of Sierra while the police spoke to the young man. They moved toward the road close to. They soon noticed the first unsettling clue as they drove along the road through the fields, where the young woman had started her solo journey home. The corn stalks in one area were heavily pinched, as if someone had waded through them, one of the officers noticed. With a flashlight, he made his way over there, and after a short distance, he noticed Sierra's bicycle. The police officers examined the bicycle and discovered blood stains on the handles and a woman's sock next to the bicycle. He informed his co-workers about the find, and soon additional police officers showed up. A screwdriver, some car fuses, and a pair of men's sunglasses were among the additional items they discovered upon closer inspection not far from the bike. The bicycle was transported across the cornfield following motorcycle tire tracks, which was equally intriguing. All of this was sufficient for the investigators to draw the depressing conclusion that Sarah had most likely been stolen. They started to take a closer look at Josh as a suspect as the case took a serious turn. First of all, statistically speaking, the people who are closest to them are most likely to end up being the culprits. Second, Josh was riding a motorcycle that evening, and Sierra discovered tire tracks near the motorcycle. In addition, the detectives questioned why the man didn't ride his motorcycle home instead of walking the young woman. She had less than a mile to go. Josh agreed to let the police look around his home, car, and motorcycle, so that's where the officers went. Stumbled upon his work overalls, which had blood on them. The young man claimed that the blood on the clothing came from animals, and that he had worn them while hunting. The overalls were given to specialists by the investigators, and they quickly determined that he was telling the truth. Otherwise, there was no evidence to support Josh's involvement. The specialists also looked over the field finds and took one DNA sample from them that belonged to an unidentified person. Josh offered a sample right away, but it did not match, so he was no longer taken into consideration. A potential suspect, and the police began looking for additional leads. They got a call from a farmer the next day. The man claimed that he and his son were traveling down the same road on the evening of Sierra's disappearance. They came across a motorcycle helmet on the side of the road at one point, and the father instructed his son to bring it to the vehicle. Later, when he looked at it more closely, the farmer discovered some blood on it. The police acknowledged that the helmet may have belonged to the kidnapper when he contacted them later, but their identity was still unknown. When the FBI became involved in the investigation at this point, they chose to closely examine the picture Josh had taken of Sierra just before she vanished. The detectives were able to identify the young lady's clothing thanks to the photo, but they also noticed that she was sporting a fitness bracelet on her wrist. The device had been turned off shortly after Sierra vanished, so the investigators were unable to locate it when they immediately requested geolocation data for it. Added tip was given to the police. Soon after, Josh reported that a suspicious-looking white van had been following him and the young woman as they were traveling down the road. The driver appeared to be following them, according to the man. When the couple slowed down, the car, which was moving slowly, also slowed down. Josh even attempted to drive up to him at one point, but the driver veered off. The man found it odd, and he even partially remembered his license plate number. The car and its owner, who was discovered to be a woman, were quickly located by the police. And investigators found that she was unrelated to the crime. She herself claimed that Josh had attempted to approach her from behind and push her off the road during the conversation. Investigators came to the conclusion that there had merely been a breakdown in communication between them and kept searching for new leads. After searching for several days without discovering any new information regarding Sierra's disappearance, the police decided to speak with every person who had ever been convicted of a violent crime and lived in the neighborhood. Communities close by. As they read through the list of these individuals, they noticed James Worley, a 57-year-old man, right away. He was a short distance from the field where Sierra's bicycle was discovered. The police were so interested in him for a very clear reason. In the 1990s, James had been found guilty of kidnapping a young woman. She was on her bicycle when a man suddenly rammed into her in his van while brandishing a screwdriver. Sierra vanished while he was trying to force the young woman into the car, so she was able to escape. Police immediately suspected James of kidnapping after learning about his bike ride and the screwdriver found next to him. He was consulted by her investigators to confirm this theory. Although he claimed he had not killed anyone and was obviously annoyed by the visit, the man voluntarily allowed the police to search his home. On their 120-acre farm, where James and his mother resided, there were a variety of buildings. The detectives took a while to examine each one. James repeatedly insisted to the police that he had not kidnapped the victim throughout this process. Sierra and it were the only two who were aware of the case. The man was literally saying the same thing over and over, which started to seem strange to them, but something more intriguing awaited them after that. Suddenly, James revealed that he had recently traveled along that road on the night of Sierra's disappearance and that his motorcycle had broken down not far from where the police later discovered the young woman's bicycle. He allegedly saw her bike and decided to approach it, so he entered the field while pushing his motorcycle close by. The man continued by saying that as he was walking there, his helmet, sunglasses, screwdriver, and car fuses all fell out. James' motorcycle abruptly started up once more, and he continued driving without picking up all those items. The detectives, as you might have guessed, were very dubious of this story. In addition, a witness who had seen a strange van on that road the evening of Sierra's disappearance had come up to them just a few hours earlier. The vehicle was traveling at a very high speed, exceeding all legal limits when the witness noticed it. He committed the license plate number to memory and provided the police with that information. Detectives discovered the van belonged to James after running the blades, and during a search, he discovered it close to the house. The police found some interesting items inside the van, including a ski mask, duct tape, plastic clamps, handcuffs, and a maze, after the man permitted them to search it. The items themselves did not in any way suggest his guilt, but given James' history of kidnapping, a set like this raised suspicions in the eyes of the authorities. But in one of the barns, the spookiest penalties were waiting for them. Detectives discovered a separate room with an air mattress inside of a hidden door and chains next to it that appeared to have been put there to keep someone inside. The refrigerator that was next to the mattress contained blood traces, which the police discovered. Additionally, there was a noticeable bleach aroma, which led them to believe that the blood had undergone a thorough cleaning. The contents of a small box, however, served as the main hint. There were several pairs of bras and one pair of women's underwear had blood on it. All of this was sufficient to at least temporarily detain James while experts reviewed the gathered proof. The man was brought in for questioning and asked to explain the bloody, chained-up hidden room. James responded by telling them another dubious tale. It was just his improvised film set, he claimed, created because he wanted to set up his own studio to shoot adult material. Naturally, the detectives didn't take him at his word. The space appeared to have, however, they were unable to link it to Sierra's disappearance or find out where she was until, on the third day after she vanished, during a protracted search, police discovered Sierra's body in a freshly dug grave in a field. Her hands were handcuffed, and she had a large plastic toy in her mouth in addition to wearing an adult diaper, and medical examiners determined that she had been wearing one. In addition to not finding any evidence of violence, they were unable to even estimate the time of death. At about the same time, forensic experts were actively going over all the information gathered from James' barn. The cops also got geolocation data from James' smartphone and found female DNA on one of the pieces of duct tape next to the mattress, and it matched Sierra's DNA. It turned out that he had spent almost 2 hours close by on the night of the young woman's disappearance. Another unsettling piece of information came from the psychologist James had a judge appoint for a prior kidnapping. According to him, during one of James' sessions, James said that he was learning from his mistakes with every new kidnapping and that the following time he would bury the bodies. Evidently, the psychologist decided not to alert the police to his client's troubling statements, and only did so after the man had been charged with murder. The detectives created the most likely chronology of events using this collection of clues. Based on his geolocation data, it appears that James saw Sierra on the road that evening, struck her with his helmet, and then dragged her into a field with his bicycle. The man remained there until dusk. He called his brother at that time to inform him that his motorcycle had broken down. It appears that he did this to establish an alibi. As soon as it started to get dark outside, James drove home, got off his motorcycle, hopped into his van, and then drove back to the field where he had left Sierra and brought her to his barn. The young woman was either asleep or restrained. James was the only one who knew what happened next. It appears that he mistreated the victim for a while before killing her and burying her in a field. The victim may have stayed there for 3 days, according to expert speculation. The case went to trial despite the man's continued denial of all of these accusations. The prosecution introduced new evidence that strengthened its case against him before the trial officially began in March 2018. It turned out that James' keychain contained the key to the handcuffs that were placed around the victim's hands. However, they failed to offer any convincing defenses for their client's innocence, so they stuck with the theory that James only wanted to set up an adult film studio in his barn and the police connected that to the murder. In less than a month, the trial came to a close, and on March 28, the jury found him guilty. James was sentenced to death as a result, and his execution is set for May 20, 2025. Given everything they now knew about the man, the detectives knew that this story was far from over. James had committed similar crimes in the past, according to the police, but he was able to escape punishment. Although they were still working on James' case, investigators were unable to connect the unsolved disappearances to him. The victim's parents created the Sierra Scholarship and worked on a bill that would have mandated the state to make an open investigation. List of people who have been previously found guilty of murder and kidnapping. The legislation was swiftly endorsed and became law on March 20, 2019. Share your opinion on this story in the comments and don't forget to like it. Thanks for watching.